I think every child wishes their stuffed animals would become real. I think it's safe to say every child also had a favorite stuffed friend that was their confidant and constant companion. I was no different in that regard, but hey, nothing special or unique about me. Nope, no worries there. Anyway, mine was a stuffed cat. I was especially fond of it when I was really young, and not allowed to have cats due to crazy bad allergies. A few years later, a constant prescription to Singulair remedied that, and now I don't even need that pill to be around cats. I guess it was enough to get my body used to them. My stuffed kitty was my make-believe pet. I called him Mittens, and took him everywhere. I'd even try and feed him some of my cookies. Back when life was all golden. Yeah, back when I didn't know any better. My name's Phil, by the way, and if I sound jaded and bitter, well, it's 'cause I am. I'm not a nice person. I own it. It took me a few nasty breakups, getting fired from a few jobs, some assaults I got arrested for, and some I got away with, not to mention the fights I lost, to come to this conclusion all on my own. Maybe it's a case of if you get called a jerk enough you become one. Nice guys finish last and all that. I'd like to think I wasn't always this way, but my problems started early on in high school. I had a nice stable upbringing, well, until my parents' divorce. It was never finalized. My dad stormed out after a fight and got in a nasty car crash, dead on impact. I guess my mom never forgave herself, and if I had to pick the moment of innocence lost, that was it. I remember laying in my bed, clutching Mittens, and trying to ignore the screaming. I couldn't focus on the handheld game I'd been playing. It lay turned off beside me on the covers. I was 10 that last night I ever saw my father. Still, I tried to be a good boy, and the man of the house, like everyone kept telling me. I could almost pretend things were still happy. Until high school, some years later. They say kids can be mean, and I can attest to that, especially when people know your dad died in an exceptionally violent car crash while there were pending divorce proceedings. Those sort of things tend to make the paper, and like I said, kids can be mean, but I could be meaner, and that became my way of dealing with it. It all boiled up together. The unresolved trauma, the dysfunction, the confusion. I mean, what did happen? My parents used to get along, before. Why me? Why us? This led to resentment, especially at the kids who were picking on me, going home each afternoon to what seemed like normal, happy lives. I didn't get afraid of these bullies. I fought back. At some point, however, I went from being the one who was bullied to the bully. I was more mean, more dark, more tormented than they could handle, and I liked it. Innocence lost and forgotten. Little Mittens sat in a box downstairs, carefully preserved by my mother, memories of a sweet little boy who grew into something she didn't recognize. This wasn't teenage angst, this was rage and hatred. She took me to therapy, but therapy tends to not work out so well when the patient doesn't cooperate. After all, Doc, it's not me, it's all of them. If this had happened nowadays, I'd probably be labeled a potential mass shooter. But even if I had access to guns and the know-how to operate them, I didn't want to kill anyone, and shooting them would be too easy. No, I'd become a brawler. I liked getting down and dirty, and I didn't want to kill anyone, just hurt them bad enough that they went away honestly regretting having messed with me in the first place. And that cost me high school. Inevitably, when you want to be that guy, someone always is going to try and see how tough you really are. My last year, with a diploma somehow miraculously seeming to be in sight, a last-minute transfer decided to test me. In retrospect, I guess you could label him the good guy. He was an athlete, got good grades, seemed to get along with everyone. He wasn't a bully. In all fairness, by this time, I was. And he felt like it was his duty to bring me down several pegs. We had run-ins, verbal, until I'd had enough and slammed him into a locker. He was strong and fast, and he hit me several times before trying to wrestle me to the ground. I got enraged, and there was a crowd, and I would not be humiliated or lose my rep. I was losing this fight, but I saw a weakness and was quick to exploit it, slamming my knee into his crotch repeatedly. Then, as he rolled off me, shrieking in pain, I stood up and stomped on that sensitive area. A guy like him, who took such pride in his physique, I knew that would really do emotional damage, not to mention physical. I kept kicking anywhere I could as he rolled away from me, begging for me to stop. Students were frozen in shock around me before someone jumped in. "Hey, enough, man! What the hell is wrong with you?" A few others joined in, but before I started fighting them or them me, a few faculty members spilled out into the hallway and put an end to things. Ultimately, the principal, who was already way too familiar with me and my issues, decided to call the cops. The boy had to go to the hospital, and while the police were waiting for my mother and the other boy's parents to arrive, they got an update on the condition of my latest victim. It turned out that in addition to a cracked rib, he was going to lose one of his testicles. I snickered, then commented they should cut both off, he was a girl anyway. The police roughly grabbed me and shoved me into the waiting patrol car. They didn't need to question me, there was no shortage of evidence. Later on, as I sat in the holding cell, one of the cops stopped by, just long enough to tell me how pukes like me made him feel. How could I assault such a nice kid, and put my mother, an already suffering widow, through this? I had a nice house, a nice family. Plenty of kids who had less were better than I was. I sneered that he wouldn't understand, and I made my disdain for authority known. He commented that he doubted the judge would understand either, and that would be a shame as I would be charged as an adult. The cop left me in the damp silence of that holding cell. Suddenly, tears welled up in my eyes. Of all the random things, I thought of Mittens, my innocent little plush cat. Then I thought of my real cat, Stormy, who had passed away last fall. I remembered my dad, probably watching me from somewhere, filled with shame at his actions and more shame at mine. I imagined my mom, upstairs in the police station lobby, trying to get me out, or maybe at home, finally deciding that I wasn't worth trying to help anymore. Hot tears blurred my vision. In that moment, I was really and truly sorry. I had messed everything up, and I didn't even know why. I never stopped to care about anyone, not even myself, despite the fact that everybody had given me every possible chance. I had no one to blame but myself, and that cut the deepest. Unfortunately, no one was there to see my tears and remorse, and even if they had been, they likely would have thought it to be crocodile tears, self-pity. I'd like to think that if I went home then, I'd have learned my lesson, and been all rainbows and happiness, kind to a fault. But I wouldn't know. Because when you assault someone, and also cause them to lose a pretty important part of their anatomy, they tend to want some kind of payback. And to a straight-laced family like that Jock's, payback happens in the courtroom. And judges tend to agree that punishment is in order. I was 17 when this occurred, and it was a few months in juvie before I saw a judge. Ironically, my therapist tried to help me, even though I'd been such a jerk. Maybe he saw something in me worth saving. Or maybe he was a sucker. I wanted to cling to hope that there was something worth saving here. I tried to believe I could be better. I wrote an apology. I tried to stay out of trouble in the juvenile facility, but these boys were way more awful than the worst bully my high school had ever produced. Well, except for me apparently, because after I beat the snot out of 2 boys, I was segregated. It didn't matter they started it. Jail, whether for kiddies or grown-ups, is definitely not a place to stand out. And despite my issues, the others could tell that I didn't belong. And this led to getting picked on, which led to me fighting back. Going to court while in administrative segregation for an assault, while being held for an assault, does not look good. It also swayed the judge that I should be tried as an adult. Except I wasn't going to trial. I was facing at least 5 years, and they had me dead to rights. I took a plea, and I got 2 years instead, at the adult facility. With With time served and good behavior, if I could manage such a thing, I could be out in 18 months. Ironically, the punishment of jail brought me full circle, right back to being a monster. I'm not reliving that, even for this journal my therapist suggested I keep. Nope, we are skipping over that. Point is, I got out. I made it. I got out. I was alive, and my mom was still alive. How, I don't know. The hell that poor woman went through. And I had some serious fences to mend. She tried to support me. I think on some level, she felt guilty still. First her husband and now this. We mutually agreed during the prison phone calls, visits, and letters to table my issues until I got home, because jail was tough enough. I vowed to do better, to be better, and I meant it. I also inadvertently figured out a way to do it. Compartmentalization. I acknowledged that there could be a nice person inside of me. I could give him room to grow, but he couldn't come out in jail. No way. That just got you targeted. Well, then I was home, but I had to contend with a period of probation, where I'd continue to be monitored. The court had ordered therapy and anger management, so I reached out to my old therapist. Surprisingly, he seemed happy to see me. Dr. Keevish always had soft, understanding features. I noticed that now. In my distrust, I always just saw judgment. I apologized and thanked him for having tried to help me. In that first session back, he remarked that he saw maturity in me, and that I should be proud about that. He also suggested this journal. I went back to stay at my mom's. I was 20 now. I thought of Mittens and my childhood quite a bit, the memories becoming so painful at times that I actually felt like I couldn't breathe. Maybe I was seeking a reminder, a way to keep myself on track. Maybe I was hoping somehow to bring the magic back alive. Whatever the reason, one rainy Saturday afternoon I was downstairs, rummaging in the totes where my mom had lovingly packed away all my kid stuff. Next to old coloring books, action figures, and little kids' art projects was Mittens. My old friend looked none the worse for wear, but then again, I'd always taken good care of my stuff. And well, this white and black furred plushie had been my best friend once. Reflexively, I hugged the toy and smelled that smell of stuffing and fabric that never failed to comfort me so long ago. When I was little, the stuffed cat had seemed so big, but now, as a man grown, I realized that he was just about the size of a real cat, no bigger. Overcome with melancholy, I didn't notice that shadow at first, but when I did, my heart jumped in my throat. I stared at it, tucked in the corner next to the giant boiler for the heater. Frozen. Other memories of childhood started to come flooding back, unwelcome and in a rush. The shadow people, I'd called them. Well, as I later learned, the entire internet called them that also. I told myself this wasn't really a person, that what my mom had shown me as a kid. I focused on that shadow. I'd faced way worse than this in jail. This was silly. The more I forced myself to focus on it, the more I realized it was just the space between some gardening tools and the boiler. Yeah, that's all. I'm old enough to know better. I chided myself. The rain pittered outside, and I felt the overwhelming feeling that I didn't belong down here. An absurd thought to have in your own house. Another thought popped in my head, and it honestly made me feel kind of sick. My mom was at the church, helping to set some things up for an upcoming Christmas party. Don't ask me why the prospect of being home alone filled me with dread when I was a 20-year-old man. I don't have an answer for you. Just like I don't have an answer as to why I ran up the steps clutching Mittens, mouth dry with fear, not daring to turn around like I was a 6-year-old boy. I didn't even put the lid back on the bin or turn the basement lights off. I just slammed the door shut and clicked the lock. When my mom did get home, she asked about it. She went downstairs to do some laundry. Funny, in my whole life she never once seemed afraid of the basement, or anything else like that. I used to think of it as a grown-up thing. She'd even tell me, when you're an adult, you'll realize there's enough things to be afraid of that are real, without making any up. Funny, I'd been to jail. I'd seen some rough things, scary things. but what I felt in that basement felt pretty real to me, and I was an adult now. That night, I used the nightlight. I hadn't plugged it in since I was a tween. It didn't save me from the nightmare, if you can call it a nightmare when it was something that actually happened. It was about the time my dad had sent me to time out. It wasn't a big deal. I was a good boy then. Basically, I'd been giving them a hard time about not wanting to drink some carrot juice. They were on a juicing kick, inspired by Jack LaLanne. It was a bright sunny day, and I wanted to be done with this so I could go out and play. But that carrot juice tasted terrible. I wasn't being defiant, but I honestly couldn't bring myself to drink it. My mom suggested I hold my breath and chug-a-lug it. They both tried telling me how good it was for my body. I just couldn't. This prompted frustration, and they both had to clean up some things in the kitchen, so the carrot juice remained in front of my place at the table, and I was told to sit at the 4th step down from the door on the basement steps. This was the backup timeout spot when my parents were in the kitchen. I wasn't far, but the door isolated me. Honestly, a more effective timeout than sitting in a corner. Like I said, I was a good boy, and had probably only had to go and time out maybe a dozen times in the years leading up to this moment. I sat on the wooden step. I could feel the old gray paint peeling and snagging on the butt of my shorts. I hated those old steps. They just looked creepy. Old brown wood with peeling gray paint all over. They matched the basement well, though, with its old whitewashed walls and concrete floor. The house was over 100 years old, and the basement and attic were the only places it really showed. Well, I sat on that step, shaking my leg and messing with my fingers, being bored and a little annoyed. Why was it so important I drink the carrot juice? For all that, why couldn't I just eat some cooked carrots with butter on them? That I actually would have liked. My mom had said juicing was healthier, but that made no sense. It's a carrot, whether you eat it or bite it, or drink it, or anything. What was that? My thoughts ended as abruptly as a train car that jumped the tracks. I knew I just saw something move in the shadow by the washing machine. The basement lights were on. I had to turn them on. It was almost completely dark down here, even in the daytime. Only a little light could sneak in through the dryer vent. No, nothing was there. Nope. Well, I really hope they don't keep going with the juicing. No vegetable was fun to drink. Yesterday they'd done celery and apple, and that was just barely drinkable because of the apple. But I mean, come on. Everyone knows that you drink fruit juice, not vegetable. Why would that juicer guy on the Home Shopping channel want to torture people, telling them to drink celery and carrots, probably onions too? The wall just moved. Oh, Father God, the wall just moved. No, wait. It's a man sliding out of the wall. No, this can't be happening. I laughed giddily, telling myself that I was seeing things because I was drinking vegetables. Except even as a 5-year-old, I knew that made no sense. I remained frozen for what seemed like ages before raspy screams erupted from my throat, which felt like it was rusted and needed oil. I leapt up and ridiculously started pounding on the unlocked basement door, screaming gibberish. "Ah, Daddy, come quick, there's something down here with me, help! I'll drink the carrots, I'm sorry, Daddy." In panic, not daring to turn around, I clutched the doorknob and collapsed through the doorway, in front of my astonished father and ashen-faced mother. At that moment, I awoke in my bed, dripping cold sweat and clutching my sheets. I was a little dismayed to see the sun wasn't up yet. What was it about coming back to your childhood home after a long time away that made things feel so real again? Awake now, I remembered how the rest of the carrot juice fiasco had went. Dad went downstairs to check, to make sure no one had gotten in somehow. Finding nothing and no broken doors or windows anywhere in the house, he tried to explain to me that what I saw wasn't real. I'd already drunken the carrot juice like it was a chocolate milkshake, crying and shaking. My parents could tell whatever had happened had scared me really bad, and for a while after that, I became what my mom called her Velcro boy. I never wanted to be alone, because as more unwelcome memories came flooding back, that day hadn't been the last scary thing to happen. Not even close. Sitting up in bed, rubbing my temples, long buried memories from before my father's accident resurfaced. I guess his death overshadowed and somehow buried them. I remembered the good things, sure. That day I was arrested, those sad nights in jail, crying in my pillow, I remembered all the good things. But there's another side to childhood innocence. Childhood fear. Do you remember that? Remember clutching that favorite stuffed animal when the fear felt so real you thought you'd cry? Not fear of the bully that wanted your lunch money. Not fear of daddy hitting you with his belt. The fear of something you can't even begin to understand. Ancient, primal, looming. And that same innocence that makes you believe your toys are real doesn't let you question the reality of other not-so-pleasant things. Save me, Mittens. The thought of my little boy self-echoed in my head as I realized I'd been unconsciously clutching the plush toy to my chest. If one of those dudes on the pod could see me now, oh, they'd mock me and pick on me for sure. But if they were here, I don't think they'd be laughing. Not when you could feel the darkness hum around you. It was alive, and you couldn't convince me otherwise. Yeah, I wasn't getting back to sleep. I jumped up and raced for the light switch, cheeks flushed. Calming my breathing, I realized it was only 4 a.m. I tried to shrug it off. I had probation today anyway. As quiet as I could so as not to wake my mom, I went downstairs to the kitchen to get some coffee or something. An old habit came back to me. I checked to make sure the basement door was locked. Don't need anything surprising me while I was in here. What a stupid thought, I corrected myself. Besides, locks don't keep them out. They go through the walls, I thought with a chill. Get a grip, I hissed to the empty kitchen. Probation was uneventful, and on the way back I met up with a friend I'd made in jail. Well, friend might be too strong a word, but since I had no friends left from boyhood, having been such a punk, I had to start over. Jail might not have been the best place to source from, but my options were limited. With the various people that I'd met, Hunter was someone that had seemed the easiest for me to get along with, in jail at least. This was the first time we'd met in the free world. He got off the bus with me, and we walked the rest of the way down to my house. My neighborhood was full of semi-detached woods. On the edge of the city, not exactly suburbs, but kind of. It was near some woods, though. I was on the second to last street, and honestly, the whole community hadn't changed much from when I was a kid. My mom was out again, and Hunter followed me up to my bedroom. It had become my hangout, as well as my room, now that I was an adult. Empty soda cans had rolled under the bed, alongside some old comic books and electronics. I kept meaning to tidy up. I had my video game and PC area. I'd gotten a job over at the Charcoal Pit, a local diner, and that kept me in spending money, so I wasn't any more of a burden on my mother. I was able to buy games and stuff, take my latest girlfriend out on a date and whatever came after, and also contribute back to the household, kind of a fancy term for the two of us. Hunter took a look around. Cool, you got the new Black Ops. He cut off his commentary on what he'd heard was different in this one than the last one when he saw Mittens on the bed. Dude, why? I shrugged. I'm confronting my issues, and it helps me be accountable somehow. Hunter's smile should have made me realize that he was not a good person. It was more like a sneer. Probably not unlike the one I made at that cop the day I went to juvie. I didn't feel like he was mocking me so much as anything that was pure and wholesome in the world. But I was desperate for friends. I wanted to be normal, whatever that meant, to make up for lost time. So I just chuckled along as he teased me. First a little, then a little more. Then finally I said, "Hey, relax, man, it's just a stupid toy." I regretted the words as soon as I had said them. Mittens was not a stupid toy. The memories I had relived the last few days, both good and bad, had reminded me of that. He picked up a pair of scissors, still with that same jeering smile, and held up Mittens, forcing the scissors around the plushie's neck. Yeah, you're right, it is. I mean, come on, man, how you gonna get laid with things like this sitting around? What you gonna tell a girl, bring her back here, she's all ready to put out and sees a little kid's toy on the bed? I'm your friend, right? Stuff like this has got to go. It has to. You know I'm right. I'm helping you out. I forced myself to laugh along, even though I felt like crying. I saw Mittens in his hands. No one had ever touched the toy besides me, except my mom and dad. I felt violated that this stranger, because that's all he really was, is here, holding my oldest childhood friend. As I kept forcing myself to laugh, I guess hoping to diffuse the situation, I looked at the stuffed animal and met its glass eyes. That wasn't light reflected in them. It was tears. Tears of disappointment. Come on, man, please don't do that. He looked surprised. Then he laughed. Oh, what? You really care about this thing? What, are you some kind of weirdo? Then he stopped laughing. What if I don't want to put it down? You gonna fight me? Some things are worth fighting for, and I felt this was one of them. This man, who I was foolish enough to invite into my house, was trampling all over something he didn't understand. And it wasn't for him to understand. Just put it down, Hunter, I said. That jock hadn't deserved what I'd done to him. Not really. But if this guy didn't put Mittens down in about -5 seconds, he was going to get so much worse. Hunter had seen me get in a fight in jail, and I wanted to. He knew challenging me would result in a fight, and if I was serious over the toy, I'd back up what I'd said without hesitation. He was visibly trying to decide if it was worth fighting over, or should he just be humble and walk away, when something behind me seemed to steal his attention. His face went sickly white, and his eyes went big. Whatever he was seeing, his slick mouth was rendered speechless by it. He almost delicately put Mittens back on my bed, then set the scissors on the desk. His mouth was working at this point, but no words were coming out. Oh, I knew what he was seeing all right, and I thought I knew why, too. There was some kind of power here. Something that came before me and would probably be here after I was gone. Maybe a lot of houses had something like it, where the strength of a child's imagination, with their purity and willingness to believe, somehow meshes with and feeds something else. Like some kind of weird symbiotic relationship. The presence derives strength from the child, and their memories intertwine. This entity was no friend of mine, but Hunter was attacking us both, and the shadow creature was protecting what he saw as his own. As Hunter made for the door, shaking, I knew the moment he was gone, the entity would likely have something terrible in store for me. I forced myself to spin around quickly, too. Nothing. It had gone. That wouldn't be the last I'd see of Hunter. The following day, his face appeared on the morning news. He'd apparently been eviscerated in the woods behind my development, and police were unsure if it was a wild animal attack or a wild human. You can always tell by how vague they try and be. It was extremely unlikely any animals happened to be passing through those woods that could do that to a person. And I was silently hoping and praying no one remembered seeing me with Hunter the previous day. That was all I needed, and I couldn't exactly account for any time after that. I was home alone. No one ever asked me about it, and as days slipped by, I breathed a sigh of relief. The incident seemed all but forgotten, aside from the occasional church gossip. The only thing that really bothered me was that when I woke up the day after Hunter ran out of the house, Mittens wasn't in bed with me. Yes, I'd reverted to sleeping with the stuffed cat. Call it sentimentality, call it fear. Either way, don't judge me, okay? Not like anyone's ever going to read this. I know I was cuddling Mittens when I fell asleep, the dim glow of the nightlight providing some comfort. When I woke up, he was gone. I figured maybe my mom had grabbed it, but that didn't make sense. She hadn't looked in on me sleeping since I was like 12. Maybe she was being sentimental too? But when I went downstairs to get breakfast and coffee, there was Mittens on the kitchen table. Odd. It was then that I turned on the TV and saw the news report about Hunter, pushing Mittens' unexplained movement out of my mind. Until that night after work, anyway. Things had greatly improved between my mother and I. I'd even made a normal friend from work, a funny guy named Jesse, whose life hadn't taken the rough turns mine had. For whatever reason, he liked hanging out with me, and we had fun. Just to be safe, I put Mittens away whenever I knew Jesse was coming over. I did the same thing when my new girlfriend Abby came over. And unlike the dysfunctional chaos I'd usually found with girls, this actually seemed nice. The holidays came and went. First Christmas, then New Year's. There really hadn't been anything strange, aside from late one winter evening when I'd been sent downstairs to grab an extension cord and felt that familiar icy fear running up the steps like a lunatic. Seeing my mom, her sister Beth, Abby, and Jessie all sitting in the living room, looking at me after hearing me thunder up the steps, I tried to shrug it off, saying it's a little cold down there. It was a cozy Christmas night and all was soon forgotten. All the same, I'd been avoiding the basement. The funny thing was, my mom still never had any issues down there. Maybe Christmas magic somehow keeps a lid on malevolence, but growing up, I don't remember anything really scary ever happening around the holidays. Sure, there were spooks, like the extension cord incident I just mentioned, but no full-on manifestations. But after New Year's comes what I think of as empty winter, and that time of year played host to some of my worst memories, especially after my dad died, when I started acting out. My mother and I had some of our worst disagreements during that time. The early cold winter nights, the perfect backdrop for our shared depression. But when I was younger, the shadow people were very active during empty winter. If I was ever home alone, I'd be sure to see them, even in broad daylight. They'd torment me while I played with my new Christmas toys, whispering to each other, just under what would be discernible volume. Going up to the bathroom, they'd hover beyond the reach of the lights, or flit in open doorways to darkened rooms. Taking a shower was no fun, because I was always afraid of what pulling back the curtain would reveal when it was time to dry off. Not to mention when I could just swear I saw the shadows play against the light beyond the curtain. I was a scared little boy, and I guess, when it all came down to it, after my dad died, I traded one set of fears for another, and now I was a scared man. Empty winter this year wouldn't be so bad, I told myself. I was a grown-up, and besides, things were getting better. I'd mended things with my mom, had a job, and was going to start college, having finally gotten my GED. I had a pretty nice girl and a pretty cool friend. Except the nights felt just as empty. The shadow people resumed whispering, and whatever warped dynamic here just kept right on going. The more I thought about it, it seemed almost undeniable that I had somehow released something when I came home. I felt the energy shift, and it reacted to it. I can't say exactly how, and I know I sound crazy, but all these years I was being a little scumbag. I don't remember anything happening that I couldn't explain. Now, in my effort to reconnect with simpler times, I had inadvertently reconnected with something else, and Mittens was somehow a conduit. As much as it pained my heart, maybe Mittens needed to go back into storage, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I stewed over this, agonized over it. At times, I just wanted to stop being afraid, and at others, I berated myself for being so dumb. As an adult, I knew that none of this could be real. Shadow people and all that were just your brain filling in vacant space or something. I should crack open a psych book. I remember hearing somewhere that all this spooky stuff was easily explained by psychology. But psychology seemed to hold no power when I felt the icy grip of the shadow people. Have Sigmund Freud sit in my basement at 4 a.m. Have him feel the raw electricity of them, and see how you could explain that away in a book. When February began, I had to admit something was wrong here, and I was somehow contributing to it, feeding it. My mom still felt nothing, and I wasn't going to scare her or have her think I'd completely lost it. As it was, I think she was a little weirded out by my ongoing attachment to my childhood stuffed toy. I needed to break the connection, and while Mittens wasn't to blame, I really did feel he was somehow a conduit. Then I got a great idea. Well, I thought it was anyway. In retrospect, I don't know what the hell I was thinking. Abby was a cutesy girly girl, and obviously always had been. She still had a lot of her girlhood dolls and stuffed animals out on display in her bedroom, and I was sure that it would warm her heart at Valentine's Day to receive a dozen roses, a box of chocolates, and Mittens. The shadows were in my house, and the energy resulted from what Mittens meant to me. So this was the perfect solution. Instead of shoving my childhood friend in a plastic tote in the basement, he could go make my girlfriend happy. residing on her baby pink shelves with all her other plush friends. I wrapped a red bow tie around the black and white cat's neck, and come Valentine's Day presented him and the other gifts to Abby. She was very appreciative, and never having seen the plushie before, probably assumed I'd just bought it. I didn't tell her otherwise. We made love right there in her room. This was nothing new. I'd learned to ignore all the stuffed animals. At first it was awkward, but when you're alone in a room with a pretty girl well, let's just say it's easy to tune out just about anything. But that day, with Mittens there, it felt really wrong. I pushed it out of my mind, telling myself it was only because it was my toy, not one of hers, and so of course there were attached memories. That was what made it feel wrong. Nothing else. I never stopped to consider what would happen if we broke up, that I would likely lose Mittens forever. Not exactly something you can count on getting back after a breakup, especially when you didn't tell your girl it had any meaning to you. I guess in some unconscious thought, maybe I planned on us getting married, and one day our child would have Mittens. As it turned out, I would get Mittens back the very next day, after Abby's mother called me in hysterics. Her 21-year-old, perfectly fit and healthy daughter had apparently died of a massive heart attack during the night. I was in shock, and I staggered across town to Abby's house. I had my license, and my mom had no problem with my borrowing her car, but I didn't trust myself to drive right now. I was more numb to the cold than from it. This made no sense. Middle-aged fat guys die from heart attacks. Old, stressed-out executives, not college cheerleaders. This girl was fit, healthy. I could tell from our time in the bedroom she had plenty of stamina. She was more fit than I was, eating salads when I'm eating cheeseburgers and fries. As I knocked on the door to Abby's house, I remembered there was another, more rare cause of a heart attack. Fear. I felt the chill of empty winter then, and it was strong. Abby's mom opened the door, eyes red and puffy from crying. There wasn't much to be said. The common link that connected us was resting in the hospital morgue. I went upstairs to my girlfriend's room one last time, the roses still fresh in their vase, the chocolates barely touched. I collected Mittens and walked out. I misjudged this whole thing. I see that now. See, energy is a tricky thing. When I was little, and I'd tell my mom how much I loved some of my toys, and I thought they were real, she'd tell me that they were, in a sense. My energy, my love, kindness, and innocence could go into them, and they would come alive. A sweet thing to tell a child, and I believed. When Mittens was forgotten, somewhere in the years after my dad died, when he was relegated to his plastic prison in the basement, I'd put some not-so-nice energy out there. Crying, lashing out, disrespecting my mother, throwing my toys, breaking some of them. I came to hate what they represented, a life I would never have again. I remembered now that one of the last times I had had Mittens, I had thrown him across the room, then out into a mud pile, as I screamed at my mother that I hated her, and I wished that she'd die too. I didn't mean any of it. I didn't mean it as I said it, eyes overflowing with tears. When I came home from school the next day, Mittens and a lot of other things had been removed from my room. I guess my mom was protecting them from me. At the time it made me angry, but within a few days I really didn't care. If this toy had any kind of memory, that was his last one. My hatred, anger, betrayal against it and my mother, as it went flying out into the rain to land in a muddy puddle. All those years of memories and love tossed away like trash. I was home now, alone, in my room. Mom was at work and the day had turned gray. It looked like an empty winter snowstorm was on the horizon. Clutching Mittens, I sobbed. I'm sorry. Didn't I prove that to you when I came home? But what had Mittens seen? What did the beings in this house see? I couldn't make sense of it. None of this was supposed to be real, except apparently it was. I was an innocent child, like any other. They enjoyed scaring me. Maybe on some level, they did have power over adults. Maybe their darkness caused my parents' marriage to fail. Or maybe not. But either way, the darkness that spewed forth from me somehow pushed the shadow people away. My rage and hurt made me blind to them. The fear they need was only pure when filtered through innocence. Once I was a monster like them, I guess I held no attraction. And as for Mittens, well, he became a conduit all right, but not in the way I'd been thinking. He stored up all my hate and rage like lightning in a bottle. When I came home, I should have just left that bin in the basement alone. Maybe the cat had needed more time to cool off, or maybe I just hadn't held up to his idea of what a reformed me looked like. Hunter had to die because of what he'd done. The presence was in agreement on that. But why Abby? I guess to Mittens, formed in the innocence of childhood, witnessing adult acts like Abby and I enjoyed was upsetting. Then I walked out and left him there. I was dealing with forces beyond my understanding. Mittens was somehow an extension of the forces that shared this house, this land, with myself. He was also somehow an extension of me, and at the same time, somehow Mittens was an entity unto itself. At first, before all that came after, I taught the toy love, and that energy transferal my mom used to speak of. Then, later, I taught Mittens hurt, sadness, and anger. Now, I'd made it learn to hate me. I held up what to outsiders would still look like a regular stuffed animal. In the gray, cold darkness of the room, I looked at Mittens, the glass eyes silently judging me. Why? I just wanted things to be better again. That can happen, right? I was crying, feeling empty and broken. Shadows began to stir and swirl around the room. I didn't feel fear for once. This was worse. True despair. Looking into my oldest childhood friend's eyes, watching the shadows circle and blend into each other like storm clouds, the answer drifted back to me from the distant past. You can't unring a bell.